What is the one question every CEO should ask their head of design? That's a big question, and the answer is hidden. Eric Quint was one of the first people ever given the title of Chief Design Officer at a Fortune 100 company. He joined to design the design function from the ground up. Before our conversation, I sent him a question. What is the one question every CEO should ask their head of design or their design leader? He said it was one of his favorite questions, and the answer surprised me. Here it is. How much is the company actually investing in design? And the next question is, how much should the company invest into design? And he actually asked that question himself in his first meeting with the CEO, and the CEO had no answer. And Eric said, it's not just 3M. Design is the largest budget most CEOs know nothing about. It's scattered across departments, nobody connects. We're going to get into why this matters. And it's more uncomfortable than it sounds, especially if you're a designer. And the reality is that the noun and the verb design are actually everywhere in business conversations. Many companies claim to be customer-centric, experience-driven, applying design thinking, blah, blah, blah. The language is everywhere. And I've spent years in these conversations as a designer, as a strategist, as a facilitator across luxury, fashion, retail, hospitality, from large corporations to founders building from zero. And the gap between what companies say about design and what they actually do with it is one of the most consistent I've ever seen. So when I sat down with Eric Quint, I wanted to understand his experience inside a large organization. We talked about a lot of things. We just had an hour, so it's about design strategy versus tactics, KPIs, governance, how to build a team across 25 business units across dozens of countries. But the moment that stayed with me came near the end of the conversation, when he pulled that question. What is the one question a CEO should ask their design leader? And that's where the answer actually surprised me. How much is the company actually investing into design? Followed by, how much should the company invest into design? And when he asked this question to his CEO, he already knew that the CEO would not have the answer. And he was right, because the CEO had no idea, because the budget is not in one place. It's hidden. And Eric said that he did the exercise once, and when they finally tracked it all down, the real number was 10 times what anyone thought. 10 times. And this question is not just for design. This is a foundational problem in many companies, where design is scattered around the organization, where it's part of a department, a team, a division, when design is not recognized as a capability with its own governance and ownership. The investment becomes invisible, and what is invisible cannot be managed. And this happens on the ground all the time. No unified vision, strategy, direction, or common ground. What ends up happening is design as a lick of paint, a nice to have, a small intervention with minimal impact. There are also hidden design budgets that go into external consultancies who are not immersed in the reality of a company and have a go, let's say, at projects that supposedly matter most. Not saying it's a bad thing, but an inside view, insight and visibility is not the same as an outsider's. Decisions differ, results differ, impact differs. Not all companies are mature enough to understand the value of design, especially at the top. This is why we don't see many designers working directly with decision makers. Sometimes it's presented that way, but the reality is very different, which becomes frustrating. But designers actually don't do themselves any favors anyway. And that's something we touched on with Eric. And that's so true. Just try talking to designers who will tell you UX is better than product, or that you just need an interior designer, not an architect, or that branding is all you need. Instead of complementing each other, designers bash each other. And there are several disciplines of design. So instead of complaining of not having a say or coming after the decisions have been made, we need to stop being, as designers, pretentious. And I've seen this firsthand at all levels. It's ridiculous. There's no other way of putting it. And there's something else I have seen many times myself, and you don't need to be a designer to see it. Think about any service experience you've been through, with a bank, a telco, a health organization, an e-commerce, doesn't matter, you name it. Organizations invest heavily on the surface, the interface, the touch point, and the thing you can show in a presentation. In the meantime, the processes underneath stay broken, and this data is fragmented. The backend nobody wants to touch is still running on workarounds from maybe 20 years ago. And you get handed something broken and someone asks you to make it look better. The budget goes into what's visible and the problem stays where it lives, and nobody connects the cost of that failure to the design decisions or the lack of the decisions made years earlier. And this happens for several reasons, but ultimately the vision, the direction, the alignment, and priorities are non-existent. They're fragmented because departments don't talk. And why don't they talk? Because people don't talk. Sometimes not because they don't want to talk, but because they don't know they can or they should. And sometimes the hierarchy does not want them to talk either. And lots of it is driven by numbers. What I mean is KPIs, because they are shareholders to report to and numbers matter above anything else. It's short-termism and it matters most in some cases. And there are many reasons. There are designers who can help transform, be part of the decision at the top. And one of the key problems in these organizations, they love to stay abstract, intellectual, logical, and not go and talk to customers. They love ideas and sometimes egos rather than solutions that the world needs. And this happens in startups, in corporations, falling in love with the solution rather than the problem. Now, moving on, I want to share a story. That's something I read about. When Indra Nooyi became PepsiCo's CEO, she reached out to Steve Jobs for insights. He gave her some lessons, but here are the ones that matter in this piece of content. He told her that if design is important to her, it has to report to her because it's a new skill that she has to build in the company. And that if she doesn't show CEO support for that function, she should not even get started on that journey. And in 2008, Pepsi decided to update its logo. They hired a top agency and spent $1 million or so, and the new logo launched. And then most countries refused to use it because nobody internally owned it. The investment was real, the conviction was not. That is what happens when design is treated as something you can buy and just expect to stick around. You can spend a fortune and still end up with nothing that sticks. And this was just before she hired a chief design officer. So she got back to what Steve Jobs said and worked on creating a design culture internally. She ended up hiring a CDO a few years later. So that's one example in a large organization, F&B. And it's the same that happens in startups, in micro enterprises, in SMEs. The size doesn't matter. Design needs buy-in, alignment, embracement. And that design needs to be treated as a capability or as a function. It's the same way you treat R&D, legal, finance, whatever. With governance, with ownership, with conversations before the decision is made, not after. Because when design enters after strategy is set, it decorates. When it enters before, it shapes. And the difference between those two is commercial. It's results. And results are driven by people at the end of the day. They can be dictated by stakeholders, but it doesn't mean it will happen at no other expense. And I will leave it at that. Now, the question is not whether your company is investing in design. It almost certainly is. The question is if anyone in the building owns it and can tell you what it's doing. That's where it starts. And if it has empowerment from the CEO, design is not something anyone names in the boardroom. It's not what companies do invest in. And it's that investment that's invisible, unaccountable, and therefore unmanageable. So let's say your company is already spending on design, but the question is, are you investing the right way? At least to give it a chance to prove why it matters. And please make sure that this is beyond the buzz of workshops and post-it notes and beautiful slides. It has nothing to do with this. So let me make this more concrete, because I've been in these situations as the person doing the work, not as an observer. I worked with a car company across multiple countries, and the brief sounded straightforward. Understand customer perception, map the journey, define priorities, bang, and let's move forward. So we went where the real answers were: dealerships, business centers, real customers across different countries. And what we found was not what the company expected. People were already buying cars online. The company's assumptions about customer behavior were built on how things used to work, not how they actually worked. And the emotional relationship between what people had with the brand was completely different depending on where they lived. In some markets, the car recalled war. In others, it meant family or innovation and progress. Same brand, same product, completely different meaning. And you can't design for that from a boardroom. You have to go and find it. So we mapped it all, synthesized the findings, brought it back into the room in a language the business could act on. And that is the work, not the workshop, not the slides. The going there, the listening, the observing, the connecting what you find to the organization, to what it needs, so it can decide. And the work produced a shared reality the organization could finally make informed decisions from. And that is where strategy actually starts. The outcome is what they finally agree to see. And I've done versions of this in entertainment, hospitality companies, from discovery, onboarding, digital experiences. The discovery and onboarding surfaced where digital experience was making promises and where the physical experience could not keep. So the shift here was alignment between what the brand said it was and what guests actually encountered. And there's a mismatch sometimes. And what came out of it was clarity on what mattered most to each group, built from interviews and observations together, not a list of features. That clarity shaped the product, the message, the priorities, not all at once. A product launch is never shiny and complete. It's a starting point. What matters is that the decisions were grounded in something real and that the process continues. That is how you build something that holds up over time, with continuous learning and improvement on the front end and the back end. And here is another one, where the users were high-performing athletes and specialist staff. The business entity had its own priorities, and the product company had its own budget and focus. At least 3 different stakeholder realities as a starting point. All needed to be understood, synthesized, and aligned before anything could be built or launched, because the budget was tight as well, with several stakeholders involved to actually build and deliver, where alignment also mattered more than anything. Now, what connects all 3 examples is the same thing. You have to be willing to go where the real answers are. You have to get out of your comfort zone. You have to move fast between the problem and the solution space. You have to zoom in and zoom out and bring back what you find in a way people can act on. That requires creativity for sure, but being uncomfortable with the unknown. But it also requires understanding what the business is actually trying to do and bring another perspective if needed and bring it all together. And you have to have the conviction to say, this is what is real, even when it's not what everyone expected, and stick with it. Don't say yes to assumptions brought to you if you know what you've got. This is where organizations fail, also because they don't have all voices where decisions matter. And that is what design does when it's done properly. And that is what is missing in most organizations right now. And keep in mind that the work is never the deliverable. The work is what changes when the right people finally see the same thing at the same time. It's not a one-off. It does not end at a launch. It is a continuous process of grounding decisions in reality rather than assumptions. That is what I do, and it starts long before any brief is written, because most times the brief is rewritten anyway. Now let's wrap up. I have a set of quick recommendations for business leaders who are thinking about design seriously. Ask the question, how much is your company actually investing in design? Not what do you think you're actually spending. Reverse how you frame it. And what you're actually spending across marketing, agencies, headcount, finance, legal, every department that's making design decisions without calling them that. Do the exercise and the number will surprise you based on what Eric told me. And once you know it, you can manage it. Treat design as a capability, not as a service. This framing changes everything. Finance has governance. Legal has governance. Design needs the same. That means ownership, a clear mandate, and a position in the organization where design can have the conversations that actually make things move and change. Or I prefer to use the word evolve. And do that for real rather than thinking you're doing it. It can be painful, and the starting point will be understanding the reality of your customers and where you stand, not where you think you stand, and having the voice of your customer in the boardroom, not assumptions. This will change many dynamics and decisions and results. Give design the oxygen to build proof point. Let design show you, not tell you. And that's a reasonable ask. Give them a runway, for real. Give them freedom and freedom within structure. Then measure progress. Then the results. You will see the difference. And the hardest one is look at what you're actually spending on external agencies and ask whether any of it is building something that lasts inside your organizations and improves it over time. Hiring outside is not wrong, by the way, but the vision, the conviction, and the culture do not exist internally. If they don't exist, no investment that from the outside will work. And this is what Indranui learned from Steve Jobs. And that's true. And it just makes sense. You can hire the best chef in the world for dinner, but if nobody in your kitchen learns to cook, you will be calling them back every time you're hungry. So design is already happening in your company, most probably at the level of a lick of paint. The only question is whether anyone is in charge of it and if the right questions are being asked. Last, do not assume that a course of design thinking will make Americans. Design thinking doesn't mean you hire designers, okay? Let's be clear on that one. It takes more than that, and I hope that now it's clear. And the analogy of the lick of paint, I actually took it from Gianluca Brignoli because I think it's brilliant. I hope this helps business leaders and designers equally to see why design is important, especially that it's different in many countries and environments where the level of design maturity in business is very different. Thanks for watching or listening, and follow for more.